The Galactic Union never did settle. When they wanted a species gone, they didn't send armies. They sent paperwork. The vote to allow natural attrition for the Florins took 6 minutes, mostly because the representative from the KLYRR hive kept stopping to polish his mandibles. The verdict was unanimous. The Florins were labeled inconvenient, high maintenance, and frankly too, touch-dependent. A race that requires constant manual pollination simply isn't compatible with a modern galaxy, one delegate said, and several others nodded as if he just made a great point about fiscal responsibility. In truth, they just didn't want to be caught dead in a greenhouse fondling stalks until pollen fell out. It was messy, time-consuming, and in certain lighting, faintly indecent. On Station Zek 9, news of the decision flickered across the cantina's battered holoscreen. Most patrons barely glanced at it before going back to their drinks. At the far end of the bar, Eli Vance nursed the cheapest beer on the menu and considered whether the neon "one more round" sign above him was motivational or insulting. Eli wasn't a hero, or even particularly reliable. He was a cargo pilot with more docking fines than friends, a busted NAV computer, and a habit of accepting jobs that paid in promises and bad sandwiches. The only reason he was still in business was that other captains considered him too broke to bother robbing. He wouldn't have heard about the Florins at all if the trader next to him hadn't started complaining about a shipment. The alien was an Alvix, six-eyed and fond of dramatic size. "Whole species going to wilt," the Alvix muttered. "All because nobody wants to get their hands dirty. Or wet. Or both." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You're saying they die without, what exactly?" The Alvix leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that guaranteed half the room leaned in too. "They need pollination. Not mechanical. Manual. Hands on stalks, rhythmic coaxing until the pollen releases." The phrasing did not help. A giggle snorted out from a table nearby. The Alvix ignored it. "They respond to warmth, pressure, even, well, breath." Eli took a swig of his beer, smirking. "You're telling me these little plants just need someone to work them over daily, and they'll live?" The Alvix's sigh deepened. "For decades they had caretakers. Then came automation. But machines lack tenderness. The Florins lose the will to bloom. They droop. They dry. They—" He trailed off, shaking his head as though it were all too tragic to articulate. On the holoscreen, a clip showed a pale green, petal-crowned creature barely the size of a child's head, its leaves limp, voice trembling. "We need touch," it said before the feed cut to a political analyst droning about cost-benefit ratios. Most species saw the problem as sentimental nonsense. Eli, however, saw an opportunity. "So, hypothetically," he said, "if someone volunteered, what's in it for them?" The Alvix shrugged. "A lifetime of humidity burns and whispered insults from passers-by, most likely. No one respects a pollinator anymore. They call them pet pleasers, stem huggers, dirt flirts." The list went on. Eli stopped listening halfway through, distracted by the thought of just how bored he was lately. A bounty hunter 2 stools down, broad as a cargo crate, overheard and snorted. "Bet you wouldn't last a week, Vance. You can barely keep your ship from falling apart. You think you can keep a whole species satisfied?" The emphasis wasn't subtle. Eli rolled his eyes. "A week? I could keep them going a month easy." The hunter grinned, teeth like scrap metal. "Put credits where your mouth is, then. A month. You keep at least one Florin alive and blooming, you win. Fail, and you owe me 2 months' cargo hauls." Eli hated 2 things: losing money and losing bets. "Done," he said, slapping the table hard enough to make the beer ripple. By the time the bet was sealed, Eli had more questions than answers. How small were they really? How much touching was too much? Could you pollinate with gloves, or was this a bearskin sort of gig? Every answer he got was both more innocent and somehow more suggestive than he expected. "You must stroke the stalk from base to tip in steady motions," one instructional pamphlet read. "Overly vigorous contact can cause premature pollen bursts." He tried not to laugh in public, but failed. Several nearby patrons stared at him as if he just signed up to romance an entire flower bed. Still, the logic was there. It wasn't about heroism. It was about proving everyone else wrong and maybe walking away with enough credits to get his ship's coolant leak fixed. If all it took was a little gardening, he could manage. Probably. He told himself it was no different than petting a cat, only the cat was a plant, and it moaned when you did it right. Harmless. Practically wholesome. Maybe even therapeutic. That last thought almost convinced him he was doing this for altruistic reasons. Almost. The galaxy had decided the Florins weren't worth saving. Eli Vance decided the galaxy was lazy. And if saving them meant getting his hands dirty, wet, or both, well, he'd handled worse jobs. Probably. He drained the rest of his beer, set the empty glass down, and told the Alvics to introduce him to someone in charge of Florin welfare. "What's the worst that could happen?" he asked. The Alvics gave him a look that was equal parts pity and amusement. "You'll find out," he said. "The first time one of them thanks you." Eli had no idea why that sounded more like a warning than a compliment. But then, he was already in. And bets, like gardens, had to be tended until they bloomed, or withered. Either way, he wasn't walking away. The transport bay smelled like wet earth and sweet perfume. Somewhere in the rows of softly humming climate pods, Eli's new charges waited. A Florin caretaker, a tall insectoid in a clean white apron, met him at the hatch and handed over a towel before even saying hello. "You'll need this," it said matter-of-factly. "Humidity's set to optimal levels for them. Not for you." Eli tucked the towel under his arm, already feeling the air cling to his skin like a warm bath. The first pod slid open with a hiss. Inside sat half a dozen Florins, each barely taller than his hand, their petals shimmering in pinks, yellows, and pale greens. They blinked slowly up at him, their eyes glistening like dew. One tilted its head and said, "You're warm." Another reached out with a vine-like tendril, brushing his wrist. It was surprisingly soft, almost silky. He cleared his throat. "Name's Eli. Guess I'm here to keep you blooming." A ripple of delighted whispers passed among them. "Blooming," one repeated with a giggle. The insectoid handed him a small spray bottle and a chart. "Mist twice daily?" But more importantly, it gestured toward the nearest Florin. "You'll stimulate the stalk until pollen release. Gentle at first, increasing pressure gradually. Too slow, and they lose interest. Too fast, and you'll cause shedding." Eli kept his face neutral, but inside his brain was already spinning the sentence into a dozen questionable jokes. The Florin closest to him tilted forward expectantly. He crouched, carefully wrapping his fingers around the base of the stalk. The texture was smooth but firm, like a fresh stem. He moved his hand upward slowly, watching as the petals trembled. The plant liked being let out a tiny sigh. A few golden grains floated free. "There," the insectoid said approvingly. "But you'll need more than that." Eli worked another, then another, falling into a steady rhythm. The Florin's voices overlapped in soft encouragements. "Yes, like that. And a little higher. And don't stop yet." And he found himself sweating more from the situation than the humidity. The pollen had a faintly sweet smell, clinging to his skin. He didn't notice the small crowd gathering outside the glass wall until someone coughed loudly. A group of passing station workers had stopped to stare, faces a mix of confusion and barely suppressed laughter. One raised a brow as if to ask, "Really?" Eli gave them a curt nod and went back to his work. A job was a job. When the session ended, the Florins sagged contentedly in their pods, petals half closed in rest. "Good start," the insectoid said. "You'll repeat that in 6 hours. 6 hours. Twice a day, every day for a month." Eli walked out of the bay, towel draped over his head, muttering something about joining a very strange gym. The hallway whispers followed him. "That's the human who's touching the flowers." And he had a feeling the nickname would stick. The next session went smoother. He learned that some florins liked gentle spirals up the stalk, others preferred straight, firm strokes, and one particularly fussy bloom only responded when he cupped the base first. The way they reacted, petals flaring, stems trembling, would have been comical if not for the earnest way they thanked him afterward. "We feel alive again," Petala, the leader, told him, pressing her petals briefly to his palm. Her scent was heady, somewhere between fresh rain and warm honey. It lingered on his skin long after he left. By the third day, Eli was confident enough to experiment. He adjusted his grip, altered his pace, even tried working two at once when he thought no one was looking. That stunt got him caught by the insected caretaker, who stared at him for a long moment before simply nodding and saying, "Efficient." Efficiency wasn't the word the rumor mill was using. In the station mess hall, he overheard two mechanics talking about him. "Apparently he's in there for hours," one said. "Sweating, breathing hard, making them squeal." The other snorted. "Must be nice to get paid for that." It wasn't all easy. One florin refused to respond no matter what he tried. Petala explained softly. "She lost her last caretaker. The machines were cold. She doesn't trust touch anymore." Eli sighed, knelt by her pod, and began a slow, careful motion, barely brushing her stalk. No jokes this time, just patience. After 10 minutes, she leaned toward him, and a faint dusting of pollen escaped. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you?" He didn't realize he was smiling until he stood up. By the end of the week, his forearms ached, his shirt was perpetually damp, and he'd stopped being surprised by the double takes he got in public. A group of young station officers passed him in the corridor one afternoon, one muttering, "That's him." Another added, "I heard they line up for him." Eli kept walking. He'd learned that denial only made them smirk more. One evening, while cleaning stray pollen off his hands, Petala approached. "You work hard," she said. "Harder than we expected." Eli chuckled. "I've been told that before." She tilted her head. "You could stop now. No one else would fault you." He shook his head. "I made a bet. And besides, you still need me." The way she looked at him then made him wonder if she meant more than just pollination. The insectoid interrupted before he could ask. "Time's up. They're ready for the next round." Eli glanced at the door, at the humid haze drifting from the pods. He grabbed the towel and headed back in. Behind him, the insectoid muttered something that sounded like, "Humans. Always taking root where they don't belong." Inside, the florins brightened at the sight of him. "Welcome back," one said with a soft rustle of leaves. "We were waiting." Eli rolled his shoulders, flexed his fingers, and got to work. Whatever else the galaxy thought, he knew this much: as long as they needed someone to keep them alive, he'd be here. And if that meant enduring a few more raised eyebrows and whispers, so be it. By the second week, Eli could tell something was wrong before anyone said a word. The florins' colors weren't as bright, their petals drooped faster after each session, and even Petala's usual honeyed scent was faint. The insectoid caretaker was pacing by the nutrient tanks, antennae twitching. "There's a blight," it said, voice tight. "Fungal. It thickens the pollen, makes release difficult." Eli almost laughed at the phrasing, then stopped when he saw the worry in Petala's eyes. "What's the fix?" he asked. The caretaker hesitated. "They'll need more vigorous pollination. Longer sessions. Multiple times a day." Petala added softly, "It will take stamina." Eli didn't bother asking how long, he just rolled up his sleeves. The first attempt was messy. The thicker pollen resisted, clumping stubbornly near the base. He adjusted his grip, applying firmer pressure, until a sudden burst sent golden dust across his chest. The florin gasped in relief, petals shivering. The sight made him grin despite the sweat already dripping into his eyes. "Guess we're doing this the hard way," he muttered. And they did, over and over, switching from one to the next, until his forearms burned and his shirt clung to him like it had been through a rainstorm. Word spread fast. The humid chamber's glass walls fogged over from the heat, But that didn't stop station workers from pressing their faces to the pane, peering in like spectators at some forbidden sport. "Look at him go!" one whispered. "Two at once now? Show off!" Another elbowed him. "Bet he charges extra for that." Inside, Eli ignored them, focusing on the rhythm, steady, firm, coaxing the reluctant blooms until they spilled their stubborn pollen. The Florins' voices rose in a chorus of soft cries and sighs, the kind of sound that made eavesdroppers blush. By the third day of the Blight routine, Eli had abandoned his jacket entirely. The humidity made every stitch of clothing feel like a wet towel anyway. He wore a thin tank top now, which did nothing to stop pollen from sticking to his skin in glittering streaks. Petala often lingered after the others had finished, letting him work her stalks slowly until the last grain released. Her voice had a way of sliding under his skin. "You've gotten stronger," she murmured once, her petals brushing his wrist. "More skilled." He wasn't sure whether to take it as a compliment or a warning. The rumors reached beyond the station. One afternoon, the Galactic Union sent an inspector, a thin, humorless reptilian with a clipboard. He entered mid-session, pushing through the door just as Eli coaxed a particularly stubborn bloom into releasing. The burst caught the inspector full in the face, coating his scales in gold. "What in the Union's name is this?" he sputtered, wiping at his eyes. Eli straightened, pollen drifting from his hair. "Pollination," he said simply. The inspector glared, muttered something about contamination protocols, and stormed out, leaving a trail of golden footprints. Later, over a rare quiet moment, Petala approached while he was cleaning equipment. "You could leave this to someone else," she said. "You've already done more than any offworlder." Eli shook his head. "Not really my style to quit halfway through. Besides, I like seeing you all light up." Her petals flared slightly at that, a ripple of color passing over her leaves. "We thought no one would care for us again," she said. "Machines are cold. You are not." He caught himself staring at the way her glow reflected off the condensation on the pod walls. "Guess I'm just a sucker for high-maintenance relationships," he said with a grin. The Blight fought back. Some days the pollen refused to release at all, no matter how hard he worked. He tried new methods, faster strokes, varied angles, even alternating hands to keep up the pace. A few times he resorted to cupping the base and blowing warm air along the stalk, which drew a startled gasp followed by a rush of pollen. "Effective," the insectid caretaker noted, scribbling in a logbook. Eli ignored the smirk he was sure was hiding behind those mandibles. The station gossip became legend. In the mess hall, strangers nodded at him like he was some kind of underground champion. "You're the one with the magic hands," one cook said, handing him his meal for free. "Keep up the good work, hero." Eli decided not to correct her interpretation. If the myth kept morale high, who was he to argue? One night, well past the usual last session, Petala lingered in the chamber while the others slept. "We may not survive this season," she said quietly. "Even with you." Eli leaned against the humid wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then I guess I'll just have to work harder." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped forward, pressing her petals to his cheek in their version of a kiss. The scent was intoxicating, earthy, sweet, alive. "Thank you," she whispered. After that, the work changed. He wasn't just trying to win a bet or prove a point anymore. Every stubborn stalk he coaxed into blooming felt like a small victory against the galaxy's apathy. Every sigh of relief from a Florin felt earned. He stopped counting the hours, the sessions, even the number of onlookers outside the fogged glass. The only measure that mattered was the glow returning to their petals, slow but steady. By the end of the third week, the blight had eased slightly, but Eli kept up the pace. Petala insisted it was necessary. "You've set a standard," she said. "We'd wilt without you now." He wasn't sure if she meant physically or something else, and he didn't ask. The answer was probably yes to both. When the insectid brought in nutrient supplements, Eli mixed them into his routine without missing a beat. The Florins responded with brighter colors and stronger releases, and the station rumor mill had a field day. He's feeding them now too? Must be serious, someone said in the corridor. Eli just smiled to himself. Serious or not, he was committed. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized he didn't care much about the credits anymore.